Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Mystifying Miracles. I'm Kristen, and each week, once, most times twice a week, we just go over true stories that have mysterious elements to them. But the thing to it is they always have a miracle in them. A lot of times, more than one. So, if that sounds interesting to you, let's get into our story. Our story starts with the main character, or the person that this happened to. His name is Bill Purvis. Back in the 70s, he was in high school, he was a teenager, and he was somewhat of a troublesome, just got into all sorts of messes. It was one of the things that he had done as a teenager is ride his motorcycle through the school hallways. That kind of thing. We all knew at least one Bill Purvis back in our high school days. So, again, a little bit of a troublemaker. His story starts April 28th, 1974. Bill had been driving around with his buddy Danny in his Camaro on this night in 1974, and he was bored. He was looking for something to do, and they were just cruising the streets, and Bill got an idea, and he proposed it to Danny. Now, before I get into this part of the story, just a warning, if you do have children, it does have some details. I'll try to keep it, light, but it's not for children. Let's just put it at that. So you might not want to have your kiddos if you're listening to this story. Bill, again, was driving around with Danny, and he had an idea. He said, "Hey, Danny, I've got an idea. Have you ever been with a prostitute?" Danny said no. Bill hadn't either, and Bill was wanting to try it. So he was kind of trying to talk he was trying to talk Danny into going along with this plan to find a prostitute. Danny was hesitant. He did not want to do it. He protested and didn't think it was a good idea, but, Bill talked him into it, and he relented and said, just gave in, basically. So the two of them are driving through the streets at night in not so great part of town of Columbus, Georgia. They come upon a woman walking. She was slender, long dark hair, wearing a mini skirt, a little halter top, high heels, and so they pull up next to her. This next part it sounds a little cheesy, but this is what happened. So they pull up next to the woman. Bill rolls his window down and asks the woman, "What are you doing out here, at this hour all alone?" And the woman proceeds to answer him that she's looking for a guy. Bill then replied, "Well, you don't have to wait any longer." Again, cheesy, but I guess this is what happened. They got out of the car and began chatting with her more. Bill noticed a shabby-looking fellow coming kind of from behind some nearby hedges, and he starts coming towards them, coming out from behind the hedge, and Bill starts talking to him. And, even though he looked shabby and whatnot, Bill just figured, oh, this is how it works. This is her, pimp, I guess you could say. Bill proceeds to ask the shabby-looking gentleman, how much money? The man asks, well, how much do you two have? Between Bill and Danny, they both had about $50. So they told the man this, and he said, okay, that'll do. The man and the woman proceed to get in the back seat of the Camaro with Danny and Bill in the front, and he directs Bill to drive a little bit away, it's not too far, but again into an even worse part of town, and of course it's dark, and they pull up to this little old shabby house. This part of the story, the shabby looking gentleman actually stays in the back seat, and he stays in the car with Danny while Bill proceeds to follow the woman into this one-story shabby looking house. They go in, and Bill was kind of just wondering at that point, how is this going to go? What do I do? What's going to happen? So while he's having these thoughts, he just, closes the door behind him and locks it. Once they're inside, the woman begins to undress, and she tells Bill to do the same, so he does. And she directs him, kind of points where to go sit on the bed, so he does. And as he's doing that, she flips off the light. So it's total darkness, can't see anything, and he's wondering, I can't see my hand in front of my face, like, what's going to happen next? What do I do next? And all of a sudden, he hears like a creaking on the floor, and it's not coming from the direction where the woman had been standing over by the light switch. It's coming from a different direction. So, with him not being able to see anything, he's really getting a little bit nervous at this point. And then he starts to smell a faint smell of alcohol. And he remembers that that was the smell he smelled on the shabby looking gentleman when they were talking back when they first pulled up. Obviously, the sound coming from a different part, the smell of the alcohol. Bill is at this point pretty scared. He knows something is really, really off. And immediately, all of a sudden, the light switch comes back on. And you know that feeling when, you're just getting up, or you get up at night, and if you flip the switch, it's been dark for a minute, so you're kind of rubbing your eyes, things are out of focus, that kind of feeling. That's what Bill was feeling. He couldn't see, things were blurry, and he's trying to focus to see, okay, what's going on now that the light's on? And there, he sees the shabby looking gentleman holding out a long butcher knife. And not only that, but he had this creepy grin of a smile on his face. So this was really freaking Bill out, of course, at this point. And the man proceeds to say, "Now you're going to die." You can imagine, obviously, what the heck is going through Bill's head at this moment. No sooner than the man said that, he thrust the long butcher knife into Bill's chest, and the woman just starts screaming. The shabby gentleman proceeds to just keep doing that. One of the swipes that the man did to Bill actually hit Bill's neck, and it severed his jugular vein. So that is like a fatal type wound. Even though Bill knew, when he was losing all this blood, he knew, I've got to try to get out of this room ASAP, or I'm not going to make it. He proceeds to muster up as much strength as he can to try to get over to the door. Meanwhile, that shabby gentleman just keeps on doing what he's doing with the butcher knife. And it's getting, by the second, things are looking awful. We'll just put it that way. At one point, Bill was able to swing one of his arms and hit the gentleman in his torso. And then he was able to hook quickly his leg around the other gentleman's leg and kind of trip him so that the man would fall. Once that happened, Bill was able to miraculously reach the door, and, he's trying to jiggle the knob, and he realizes, oh man, I locked it. He's doing everything he can to open the door, and he can't get it open. He's losing a lot of blood. He decides just to ram his shoulder as hard as he can into that door, and he was able to actually bust through and get to the outside. You can imagine this picture. Bill's half dressed, struggling just as much as he can while losing all that blood and fluid, and he's trying to get back to the Camaro where Danny was. And Danny's seeing Bill just in awe and shock of what is going on. So he's staring on, just terrified as he's watching his friend struggled to make it back to the car. Once Bill was able to struggle his way over to the Camaro, he rammed him, kind of struggled up against it, and he told Danny, "Flee as fast as you can. Get out of here." As he did that, he's fading fast. He's losing all that blood, losing energy, and just knows he doesn't have much time left. So he kind of slumps down to the ground, almost in a defeat, right after he tells Danny, "Get out of here, flee, leave." Bill was actually able to make it out. Once he said that to Danny, he was actually able to cross the street into this vacant lot. It used to be a lot for a movie theater. He makes it over there, and he kind of rests himself up against a pole. And, he's trying to hold it and just hold himself up as he's struggling to breathe and just because he's got that jugular vein that's completely severed. So it's amazing that he was still able to do that at this point. Unfortunately, while he's grabbing onto that pole in that vacant lot, he's choking up on his own, fluids, and he just knows. He looks up at the sky and he knows, I'm going to be gone soon. I'm laying here. I'm dying. I'm not going to make it. As he had that thought, he had another thought that just kind of popped into his head. He remembered that 2 weeks prior to that night, a random, about 17-year-old boy had shown up at his family's front door, and Bill answered it. And the boy, he had like a stutter, a stammer, and he told Bill that day, he goes, Bill, everything you're looking for can be found in Jesus. And then he runs off. The 17-year-old boy just flees. So a very weird encounter. This thought pops up and he remembers it. Bill, now, he wasn't a churchgoer. He never prayed. He didn't know anything about God. But he remembered that encounter and he decided to pray. He knew his life was almost done, and so he began to do so. He prayed for God to save him and please to forgive him. And he was just crying out to God saying, please, God, save me. Please help me. I'm dying. Help me. And about this time, Danny is starting up the Camaro. So it's all happening so fast. You can kind of imagine, all one jumbled thing, one after the other happening. So Danny starts up the Camaro. He never fled like Bill told him to. Amazingly, he pulls right up next to Bill, and Bill had the strength to open the car door and kind of throw himself in to the Camaro. Danny immediately took off and took him to Columbus Medical Center. Get this, Columbus Medical Center was only a block away from where they were at this point. My goodness, if it had been any farther, this might have been a different story. At the ER, Bill was helped on, by the orderlies and people coming out. They helped Bill onto a gurney. You could just see a trail of blood coming down the hallway as he had come in and they were helping him with all the stab wounds and especially that jugular vein. I'm surprised he hadn't already bled out at this point. 3 doctors immediately went to work. They were on call or on staff that night, and they began to assess the situation here. And one of them happened to be a heart surgeon. So that's great because, he would know a lot, obviously, about the jugular vein and blood and your heart, obviously. So that's what Bill needed at this point in time. Bill remembers hearing the doctor saying that night, he was talking to other nurses and doctors, and he said, that Bill was going to be gone soon. He wasn't going to make it. Bill remembers hearing that, even though at this point he's pretty much out of it. They prep him as fast as they can. They get him up to surgery. He actually made it through surgery. He awoke like most people do, not knowing what was going on at first, confused, groggy. He remembers thinking, am I in heaven or hell? That was the first thought. Then he realized, oh, wow, I made it. What made him realize, oh, I made it, was he saw a policeman standing guard outside of the hospital room. And so that kind of jogged his memory. And he was like, oh yeah, gosh, I'm still here. Bill just started thinking about the previous night and what went down. And he remembered praying to God. And at that moment, he started praying to God again, just thanking him for saving his life and for answering his call. Amongst, the praying and everything, he still felt, he's human, like anybody would probably in this situation. He thought of himself as unworthy. He spoke to God in that moment saying, I know I'm a bother and you don't have to waste your time with me. You saved my life and I didn't deserve it. That kind of talk. He just thought he wasn't worthy. And he remembers God kind of talking back to him that day. God said to him, Bill, you just do what I tell you to. Let me do the rest. After time, as he's recovering in the hospital, Bill starts to ask the nurses and orderlies to read to him from the Bible. Pretty soon after that, Bill starts reading the Bible himself as he's recovering. A little bit of story kind of about who the gentleman and the woman were. This was known after the fact. 6 months after this incident of Bill's, the culprit was nabbed, obviously charged with aggravated assault, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He actually had a plan that night, and the woman was his wife, and he was basically forcing her that night to go along with this plan. He had this plan that, all right, I want to, talk or find a young gentleman, a teen, or, just a young man, kind of rope him into this whole prostitute thing, kind of a plan. And then he was going to take him out and rob him and be done. That was the plan, and he was forcing his wife to go along with it. And if you're wondering, like that night too, remember the shabby gentleman was left behind in the car with Danny. So if you're wondering how he kind of got out of that to get into the room to attack Bill, he basically just told Danny, I'm going to step out for a minute. I'm going to grab a smoke and just take a little brisk walk, and then I'll be back. Danny was like, okay, that's obviously not what he did. He went around the back way and went into the room of that house. That night that the attack happened, a doctor had told the assistant DA that Bill was not going to make it. There was just no way. He might pull through for a few hours, but by morning, he's unfortunately going to be gone. Next morning came, Bill was still alive. So the next morning when he was still alive, the doctor told the DA that, okay, Bill pulled through right now, but he's going to have extensive brain damage, So even though he pulled through, this is still not good. Like he's going to be a vegetable. Basically, Bill was no brain damage. He did end up pulling through. He did end up coming to know the Lord. I think personally, like most of these stories that I've talked about the last few weeks, there's always seems to be more than just one miracle in these stories, which is great. I just love that. The first stab that man did on Bill, it missed Bill's heart by 1/4 of an inch. So just a smidge closer to the heart, and Bill would have been gone instantly. Also, you know how his jugular vein was completely severed? Well, there's only a handful of people in the whole world that have ever survived that injury, that particular injury. Only a handful. And Bill is now one of them. That night, Bill, he lost 8 pints of his blood, and he still pulled through and recovered. Years later, after this event, the DA even said, Bill Purvis, he pulled through and made it because God had a purpose for his life. Today, Bill is married. He has 3 sons of his own, and he's actually a pastor of a church, the Cascade Hills Church in Columbus, Georgia. And it's thriving. At the time of this story that I pulled, it had over 8,000 members. So pretty successful. And I mean, his testimony, I'm sure, that was just, I don't even know what to say about it. It's just a miracle. God sees the day that he sent that stuttering boy to his front porch. Bill was kind of like bothered and annoyed that day, but he looks back now and he sees it as God planting a spiritual seed for Bill that day that happened. And had it not happened, Bill might not have cried out that night to God to save him. That was a thing that made him think of even to pray that night, was that run-in with the 17-year-old boy. So it's pretty cool. Who was that boy? We don't know. Some of these stories, was it an angel? We don't know. Only God knows. Or maybe it was somebody that knew Bill, but Bill didn't really know him. I don't know. What do you guys think? Let me know. I like to know your thoughts. Opinions, any feedback. Also, tell me where you're from. Where are you watching from? I think it's pretty cool to learn different areas of the country or world where people are watching. So let me know. Like always, I just appreciate you guys for watching so much. I know I'm new and, I'm small beans compared to most folks, but I hope these stories are fun to listen to and exciting and just get your brain thinking. Till the next one, see you guys later. Bye-bye.